Thank you very much, Mrs Ryan. I beg to move that the House has considered the performance of Govia Thameslink rail service. I had wanted to title the debate "The Woeful Performance of GTR Rail Service," but the Table Office, I'm afraid, wouldn't allow me. But here we are, déjà vu all over again, and it's no surprise to see the number of honourable members from South London and from Sussex on both sides of the House who have a close interest in this appalling and continuing to deteriorate appalling state of affairs. Southern Thameslink goes from bad to worse. They cancel more trains than the whole of the rest of the network put together. Our constituents are losing their jobs, literally. Families are unable to see their children because they get home so late at night. Students are missing lessons at schools and at colleges, and in some cases missing exams as a result of the woeful incompetence of this train company. And, Mrs Ryan, there is no end in sight. It's embarrassing, it's pathetic, it's unsustainable, and it's a national disgrace for Britain's largest rail passenger carrier. The management, the unions, and frankly, the Department for Transport should all be thoroughly ashamed that we are in the state of affairs we are. It is the single biggest issue, I would guess, for most of colleagues in this room at the moment, even more than the issue of Europe in some cases. Wow. And we continue to be inundated by frustrated, demoralised and understandably angry constituents. Last Thursday, by way of example, I was going home late afternoon on the Brighton line. I arrived a little early for a train. I actually got a seat on a Gatwick Express train. Several other trains had been cancelled. Within minutes, that train became absolutely cram-packed. People who'd missed other trains going to Gatwick Airport, and they were going on holiday, they were going travelling. Before the train left, it was so congested, somebody in front of me had a panic attack and had to be helped out of the carriage. I gave my seat up to a pregnant lady, and we had to look after her for the rest of the journey. Passengers were swapping stories about what time does your plane go, because you're more likely to miss it than somebody else. It was absolutely horrific. It was unsafe, unacceptable, and a real joke, but a very dangerous joke, I'm afraid, Mrs Ryan, as such. Of course, I'll give way.
Member for giving way, and he may find this familiar. My constituent Lucy Cooper emailed me on behalf of her daughter Ellie, who's a GTR customer. I use the word advisedly. She described being so packed on a train that the person next to her had actually fainted. She was fortunately not hurt because there were so many people crowded around her she couldn't even fall down. Isn't that not shocking in the sort of level of unsafe practices that are now arising?
I completely agree. I'm sure that all of us in this chamber today have similar stories and have had similar emails and letters. And for Gatwick Airport as well, it is the gateway to the United Kingdom. 40 million people come to Gatwick Airport, let alone if their second runway is positioned there. What an impression they get of the infrastructure in this country when they have to get on a train in those sorts of conditions. I've got many emails here. Yesterday I saw one unfortunate gentleman who became very poorly and distressed after having stood squashed for over an hour and a half in full city attire, an older American woman in tears, and several hugely upset elderly people and little children who became panicked about the heat and crush. Other people who don't get home until after 9:30 at night, having left the city at 5 o'clock. Somebody who missed their wedding anniversary, who ends up his email saying to Southern, "Frankly, guys, it's not good enough. Please give up the franchise. Please don't spend £6 million on taxes for executives. Please spend it on me. Please don't keep blaming staff shortages. They are equally blaming you, and it's me and my fellow commuters sitting in the middle. And please remember, until you give up or lose the franchise, you are a transport company, so please transport people." And it goes on and on. At the end of the day, it would seem to me that Southern and the RMT are acting like two spoiled children. Both have their positions and both are refusing to move at all. Neither gives a damn about customers. It's the customer that is suffering in all of this. It wouldn't be so bad if we had any choice about the train operator that we use, in which case Southern trains would be empty, I'm sure. The fact is Southern have a monopoly and we have no other options. Time and time again, we are getting emails like that with no sign of the situation getting any better at all. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Most grateful. Does he agree with me that although the current dispute has made matters markedly worse, in truth, the reason why Southern should relinquish the franchise is because their performance has been lamentable over many years and not just recently?
Well, the franchise hasn't been going for that many years, and of course we had all the problems supposedly attributed to London Bridge at the beginning of the year when it was bad enough, but it has got hugely worse since then, and I'll come on to that in a minute. I know many other members want to speak. So this Monday, in order to deal with this crisis, GTR introduced their emergency timetable. That came on the back of the increasing number of planned cancellations, presumably because it reduces the penalties that they have to pay for doing that. That came up on top of the loosening of the franchise agreement, which I read about in the newspaper, for which honourable members here were given no notice by the Department for Transport or indeed the company itself. And given all the interest that have been shown by colleagues here today, one would at least have expected to have been forewarned about that by the Minister herself. It was frankly discourteous and disgraceful, and has only compounded our anger with the way this whole dispute has been handled. So when the new emergency timetable comes in, what was the result? Well, last night I got the figures for the PPM for the 12th of July. So with the emergency timetable, with 341 planned cancellations, that's 341 fewer trains running, the PPM was 77%, barely three-quarters the second day in for the emergency timetable. 2,800 trains ran, 2,172 were more or less on time, 620 were late, and 122 were cancelled or very late. The result of the emergency timetable is there's less choice for customers and more overcrowding, but presumably fewer fines. Extraordinarily, Charles Horton, the Chief Executive, at his Select Committee appearance the other day, said we expect to see crowding levels evening out because of more regular intervals between trains as a result of the emergency timetable. What sort of weird logic is that? There will be the same number of passengers battling to get a train to or from work, but more inconvenience because of the timings, and surely more overcrowding because there are fewer trains to convey them. The extraordinary complacency of that attitude is absolutely baffling. And we've had specific problems caused by the change in the timetable. I'm sure my older friend from Lewis will mention the suspension of the Lewis to Seaford line in other than peak times, replaced by a replacement bus service. That includes the Port of Newhaven. The cross-channel Port of Newhaven does not now have a regular daytime train service. It includes one of my schools where we actually had the platform extended because of the number of girls from Davison School in Worthing using that station to go to and from school. It had become dangerous. Now, the only train in the morning arrives at East Worthing Station at 5:35 or 7:16. There are no further trains getting there until 18:24, and similarly, a lack of trains going home. So now a station which Southern Rail actually expanded to cater for the increasing number of pupils using it cannot be used as a stop for those girls to go to and from school. It is absolutely crazy that the crisis that this is causing. And when they cancel 341 trains as part of this emergency timetable, we are told in the briefing note from GTR the number of trains cancelled in the revised timetable is 341, which is broadly similar to the number that were cancelled on an ad hoc basis to date. So that's fine. They're just making it official that they're rubbish, but now it's part of the official timetable that they are officially very rubbish. It's extraordinary logic. And apparently, this is Ryan, they have done this without even having to get the permission of the Department for Transport. So, the Chief Executive claimed at the Select Committee the other day. So I think we would like to know from the Minister, how does this work? How are they allowed to do this and get away with this and still have their franchise as the largest passenger conveyor in the country? What are we going to have next? Why don't they reduce the timetable to 0 trains, and then they would have 100% competence in actually completing their timetable? That is the logic of where this is going, such is the ridiculousness of the situation. Now, I think this is at the heart of the problem, Mrs. Ryan. I don't believe that there is sufficient deterrent or incentive on either side for the management or indeed the unions who are party to these problems to find a resolution with any sense of urgency. And all this time it is the passengers who are suffering and losing out, our constituents. And we listened to Mick Cash from the RNT in front of the Select Committee going on about, oh, we couldn't possibly, out of safety reasons, have only operated trains, despite the fact that they already operate on 60% of GTR Thameslink services and 30% of trains on the whole of the network, and have done since 1985. They're not prepared to sit down and discuss that. They're not prepared to acknowledge independent studies that have shown there's not a major safety consideration. And then we have the management of GTR saying, oh, we've tried to sit down with them, but they're being unreasonable, and that they're all going off sick deliberately. There may be some truth in that. They may be cancelling trains deliberately in order to worsen the situation. Frankly, my constituents don't care whose fault it is. They just want it sorted. And there is, he said that, she said that, he did that, they did that. It's absolutely ridiculous. And somebody, and frankly it should be the government, should get the two parties together, metaphorically, if not physically, bang some heads together and tell them to sort it or else. I will.
And can I congratulate him on the way that he is dealing with this debate? On the question of sickness levels, it is clear from the statistics which he will have seen that they are suffering from a very high level of degree of sickness. Clearly, there is something very wrong with this, or else they've got a very sickly workforce. Would my honourable friend agree with me that there are ways that sophisticated companies manage things like sickness, and would it not be better if the management of GTR took a great deal more trouble and were more proactive in dealing with the sickness problem?
Well, I think my right honourable friend is right, and as somebody who's been even angrier than me on occasions in the face of GTR, he knows that there are solutions to this problem that just have not been properly pursued. We are told by GTR that before the dispute happened, there was approximately 21 conductors off sick at any one time, and overnight, when this dispute came in, that almost doubled to 40, and there have been spikes at 3 particular depots. So something is up very clearly. But there are things that they could do if there's genuine sickness to be sorted out, or whether it's a form of unofficial working to rule. So I've been trying to get to the bottom of the finances at this whole crisis. And at the Select Committee last week, Charles Horton said that GTR's turnover amounts to some £1.3 billion, with just over 90% of that coming from the fee paid by the DfT for them running the franchise. The amount of fine, and it's really difficult to drill down into exactly how much fine that they've paid, seems to be about £2 million. So less than 0.2% of their annual revenue is having to be paid in fines because of the incompetent way in which they have run this service. Is that a real disincentive or a real penalty? I just cannot see how, Mrs. Ryan. This is an unconventional franchise. I've tried looking at the franchise, all 668 pages of it. It's the only one in the country where the rail company is paid a fee by the department and where all the revenue from the tickets from passengers goes directly to the government. So it's difficult to see who loses out when it goes wrong. When the network fails, when there's a points problem or there's a London Bridge problem or whatever, then Network Rail pays a penalty to GTR as the operator. That penalty is only paid on to the customer if the customers actually get round to the complicated process of the compensation payments anyway. So they make a profit, potentially, from problems on the network. But we read in the Times a few months ago, when, as I say, we weren't notified by the department, that GTR had been in breach of its licence and could have lost its franchise, but instead the department agreed simply to loosen the targets for GTR, allowing an additional 9,000 trains to be cancelled a year without being in breach of the reconfigured franchise agreements. So exactly how much, these are my questions to the Minister, Mrs. Ryan, exactly how much is GTR losing, and what is the financial impact on government revenue as well? How much compensation is Network Rail paying to GTR, which is then not paid out to customers? What is the impact of the planned cancellations on penalties payable, because my understanding is that if it's planned cancellations, they don't have to pay the ad hoc penalties when trains just don't turn up or don't start or skip stations or whatever. And are there financial implications as well for the loosening of the franchise and for this emergency timetable coming in? Because what it boils down to, Mrs. Ryan, is how much do GTR and the government have to feel financially pained before they do something urgently to resolve this crisis? And this is a crisis of great magnitude. The Minister has the power to intervene on behalf of passengers. The Minister has made various statements. In yesterday's Standard, she was quoted as saying, "The real solution is for the RMT to end this dispute and the high levels of sickness amongst its members. We are working with TfL and have issued a prospectus earlier in the year for new ways to improve services in the capital." That comes after the Mayor had asked for GTR to be stripped of its franchise. And then the Minister also said, historically, the government doesn't intervene in industrial disputes. But now we're told that a letter has been sent by the Minister to the unions offering some sort of deal. Perhaps she will comment on that as well, whether it's true, whether she is going to intervene, when she can intervene, whether she's prepared to intervene. She said again, the union is holding commuters to ransom. Again, if there was a legitimate safety concern or genuine job losses, I would understand, but this is a growing industry. This is not about job losses, this is about politics. What do you want me to do? Get them in for beer and sandwiches? Frankly, Mrs. Ryan, that is not good enough. And those sort of sloganising headlines do nothing to get this problem resolved for our constituents. And she has really got to get a grip. There are many other problems as well. But back in January, we had a summit in Westminster Hall. It was a very useful meeting. My right honourable friend, the member for Mid-Sussex, was greatly aerated, and we enjoyed his interventions at the expense of the GTR management greatly, but they were heartfelt, passionate, and we all agreed with him. At that summit, we had GTR, we had Network Rail, we had Department for Transport officials, we had MPs, we had Transport Focus and others, and I think there were about 22 or so honourable members, many of those in the room at the moment. We made it clear at that stage that this could not go on. Primarily at that stage, we were looking at the fallout from the problems with London Bridge well before these additional problems came along. We were promised a follow-up summit 6 months on to assess the situation. Well, where's it gone? We have 1 week to go before we go into recess. There is no follow-up summit of getting everybody together and holding their feet to the fire, in the favourite phrase of my right honourable friend, the member for Mid-Sussex. But what really struck anybody who was at that summit is with the head official from the Department for Transport, when asked about taking back the franchise, got up and said, well, basically, if GTR were not running this franchise, a very large franchise, a very complex franchise, then I will be the one responsible for it in the Department for Transport, and you don't want that. So effectively, GTR were told there is little prospect of us taking back the franchise because we can't really run it ourselves. What sort of incentive was that to GTR actually to get their act together when they know that they can get even worse, and even then the government is not going to intervene and do something about it? Mrs. Ryan, I'm really angry about this on behalf of my constituents. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Well, so I thank the Honourable gentleman for East Worthing and Shoreham for giving way and congratulating him for getting this debate, and say that I absolutely 100% on behalf of my constituents who use East Dulwich, Peckham Rye and Queen's Road, they will identify completely with the level of total exasperation and frustration. You know, he has gone diligently through all of this. He's done all the right things, and yet his constituent situation is simply getting worse and set to get worse still, with the disruption to family life, disruption to working life, and downright safety issues. So can I simply just lend him my support and say that my constituents are every bit as desperate as his. We have no tube, we've got congested roads so they can't go by bus. People cannot lead their lives like this. So I agree with him about the point that they should be stripped of the franchise.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for that short intervention, and she echoes the words of so many of our other colleagues who couldn't be here as well, including my honourable friend, the member for West Worthing, who texted me to tell me that he was stuck on a train somewhere, otherwise had wanted to join our deliberations. There are many other problems affecting this row. It's not just the the unreliability of when the trains actually run. There is the overcrowding. There is a safety issue. There is, at the same time, Southern trying to close down all our ticket offices, and they've only given a temporary moratorium on that. What a stupid thing to do. When you can't even run the service, you then try and threaten the most easy way of selling tickets to get on it. And then we have the antiquated rolling stock on the West Coastway line. We still have the Class 313 rolling stock, 40 years old, no loos or any other basics on those, trains. We have real problems about female constituents being stranded late at night in stations far away from home because there's been a station skipped or the last train has been cancelled. This is a dangerous problem. It's not just one of inconvenience. There's danger attached to it as well. I'll give way to whoever wants to give way.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for you giving way. I see there's just two of us here who actually are on the northern side of the Thameslink line. But is my honourable friend aware that it was actually the 7:34 a.m. Brighton train from St Albans yesterday, which was a brand new train, one of the 700 stock, actually broke down. A brand new train. So it's not just about old rolling stock, it's also about new.
I fear that's right. And again, we were promised everything will be so much better because they've got the investment in rolling stock and it's all coming in, it's all going to be fine. And then finally, there's the issue about compensation. And we're constantly told by GTR, well, we have this compensation scheme, which is not easy to administer. And frankly, the amount of compensation people are getting back for the huge amount of aggro that they are getting is paltry. But frankly, my constituents are not primarily interested about compensation. My constituents just want a reliable service with a better than evens chance of them being able to get on and turn up at a station and get on a train at around about the time they wanted to catch it and arrive at their destination within about 5 minutes or so of the published times and go about their work or education as normal. That's what they want. And frankly, on the compensation side, because of the extended, prolonged, intense aggravation there has been, I think we should have serious discounts for season ticket holders in particular, so that when they renew their season tickets, whether or not they've had to put in for individual compensation, there should be a serious discount and a very large apology to go with it. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend. Just going back to the issue of compensation, I had an email from one of my constituents who is losing earnings day in, day out, and they note that I was unable to travel due to no trains running between Polegate and Haywards Heath. I was compensated £19 for my daily loss of earnings of £350. And when you mentioned dangerous, I would just like to point out to the honourable member, people's, not only are their jobs at line, but one of my constituents is so late picking up their child from nursery that they are worried that the standard procedure for most nurseries is to contact social services when parents are late. This is damaging people's lives.
Just another aspect of how extraordinarily the impact has been felt by many of our constituents. So, Mrs Ryan, in summing up, I really do think, with the greatest of respect, and I understand it's a complex and challenging situation, but enough is enough. The Minister has got to get a grip on this. If this has not been sorted, and this is my request, if this has not been sorted by the beginning of September, after the impact of the emergency timetable, and there's absolutely no clear indication of when it will be, then GTR should lose its franchise by the end of the year. There have been enough warnings, there have been enough pathetic excuses of one thing going wrong. Goodness knows what it will be by the time we get to September. But this has gone on for far too long. I hope she can give, in response to this debate, some clear indication of what it will take before action will take place that will result in this company losing its franchise if they're not going to get their act together. At the very least, our constituents deserve a proper and honest answer from the Minister about how she will achieve this and when. We're fed up, on behalf of our constituents, having to take this flak day in, day out. It's not fair, it's not right, and she needs to do something about it and tell us what now.